always looking to have this conversation with somebody, and it's hard because if you have it with an active CIO, a lot of them are in the middle of these kinds of acquisitions, and they're not really free to talk about it. So I wanted to talk M&A with someone, and since neither one of us are actively CIOs, we're working with CIOs, I thought it would be good to have this conversation with you. So I pulled the Kaufman Hall report. You can download it off the kaufmanhall.com website. They're advisory services to health systems. And they have their 2017 in review year, the year M&A shook the healthcare landscape. So it's a little older report, but 2017 is not that long ago. Here's some of the things they came up with. 115 transactions announced in 2017, highest number in recent history. 10 transactions involved sellers with net revenues of $1 billion or greater, representing the largest number of mega deals ever recorded. Largest regional healthcare transaction is Advocate in Aurora in Illinois, nearly $11 billion, creating the 10th largest not-for-profit. And just an odd statistic, but Pennsylvania had 14 deals, Georgia had 9 deals, Texas had 8 deals, most active states. I thought one of the more interesting things was, in 2015 there was 112 transactions, but in 2017 there's 115. But the transaction revenue has doubled. So in the 112 transactions in 2015 represented $32 billion in revenue. The 115 transactions in 2017 represent $63 billion in revenue. So we're seeing a growth in those kinds of things. And we can rattle off all the different health systems that are going through it. It's across the industry. So here's what I'd like to do with you. I'd like to role play. So let's say we're CIOs of 2 health systems that are coming together. You can be the larger health system because it matters. You'll be the larger health system CIO. I'll be from the smaller system, and let's discuss process, thinking, and approach to various stages of the merger. So here's a couple more assumptions. CIO. The CIO or IT was not involved in the negotiations. I know you find that hard to believe, but it happens.
Not at all.
And there's been little to no due diligence as a result of that. The merger is slated to take about 6 months from the time it's announced, but we both know that the regulatory environment, you can't bank on this, but typically it takes longer than 6 months to pull it off. I know that the Providence St. Joe's merger I went through took a little over 9 months, closer to 10 months to pull off with a 6-month announcement. So let's start with an announcement day. So this is pre-merger. It's announcement day. It's announcing intentions. You're the larger health system, so you get to go first. What's on your mind? What are some of the things you think we need to do first, and what are some things you're going to ensure that gets done?
Okay, great question. And it is not surprising that IT may not be involved in the due diligence. As I already commented when you said that. So obviously doing the IT due diligence and trying to tee that up has to be one of the first things. But even before that, I think it's critical that the CIO, in this case, me for the large organization, you for the small organization, fully understand what are the business drivers, what is behind this merger, and they take different forms. You talked about some of the bigger ones, but the scenario you're giving me here is probably the more typical, where there's a merger, a small organization coming into a large organization, right? But to understand the business drivers first, I think that as an approach, you need to think that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And what are we both bringing into this equation that we're gonna want to leverage? So I think that's critical. And I think we've all been there. You start thinking about your roadmap and the order by which you would integrate systems, assuming that that's part of the plan. Starting with all the review of the infrastructure and network, that's typically first. Then, so that the organization can operate as one, you deal with all the financials, right? And last, if you get to it, and you need to get to it, given patient and clinician integration and workflow, what are you going to do to integrate clinical systems?
Yeah.
And always with the focus on the patient. And again, it depends on it depends on the makeup of the organizations. I just heard about a merger yesterday that I had not yet read about in the news, so I think it's public that it's happening. That was a very unique one, and I'm not sure how they have to think at this point about patient flow, but typically in a merger, you're dealing with patient flow.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, I mean that is a good starting place. There's so many things to do that, you know. Again, I did go through this, so I was part of a merger team bringing a $6 billion health system together with a $13 billion health system, which today is a $22 billion health system. So, and again, went through the 9-month process of all the planning and whatnot. And to be honest with you, you really have to slow things down. It's a day-to-day kind of thing. The first thing I found to be important, again, now I'm the CIO of the smaller entity. Communication is your first job for the CIO of the acquired entity. And the number one thing people want to know is, what does this mean for my job? Because the larger entity, they're not as concerned, because they're like, hey, we're in charge here. Now that may not be the stated intention, but
yeah,
everyone who's ever watched this from afar says the larger entity will take over. And to be honest with you, in our case, it was stated, you know, a merger of equals, and that was not the case. It almost never is. I don't want to burst anyone's bubble, or any CEO who happens to be listening to this saying, no, we're a merger of equals. That's never the case. At some point, some entity the boards sort of make their way, and it sort of figures out. So my team is trying to figure out, what does this mean for me? So I have to know the story. You talked about the business drivers. I have to know the story. Why is this good for the health system? Why is it good for the community? And then eventually I have to tell the story of, why is it good for them? And, you know, it's interesting, because you don't want to overstate, you know, hey, there's a job for everybody, but literally there's enough work for everybody. That's a given. But there will be overlap in some areas. So you don't want to overpromise, but you don't want to underpromise, because I've also seen people really thrive from the smaller entity into the larger entity and take on larger roles and really almost get found in the process and really escalate to good roles. So it's not all doom and gloom like some people think. If you take the right attitude and mindset into it, develop good relationships, and do the job that you're capable of doing. And so that's the number one thing is communication. And the second thing I'm worried about on that first day is relationships. I'm trying to figure out, okay, from a relationship standpoint, obviously you're the larger organization CIO. I want to have a relationship with you. So if you don't reach out to me, I'm definitely reaching out to you. I need to know that leadership team on the other side. I need to start helping my organization to understand who their counterparts are on the other side. I'm reading as much as I can, because again, you know, some of the people who are doing mergers have been on this show. You could listen to the CIO talk and get an idea of their philosophy and their direction. So I'm reading as much stuff as I can to really understand their philosophy, so that when people ask me questions like, hey, do you think they'll have regional CIOs? Do you think they'll keep you around as a CIO? Do you think I can have some semblance of an answer? Like, you know, historically they don't have regional CIOs. This might change. I don't know. Who knows what it is? So those are probably the first two things. To be honest, I slow it down a lot, because the next set of questions people start asking is, you know, technical questions, security questions, clinical workflow questions. Are we going to change our EHR? And you can't answer that thing for another 9 months probably, because there's way too many things to consider here. How are the clinical organizations going to come together? Is there going to be a common clinical governance? Is there going to be, how different are your EHRs? Maybe you're on the same EHR, but different instances now. You know, maybe they're very similar. There's so many things. So let's talk through some of those actually. So you brought them up. Technical, security, and clinical considerations. We'll come back to some more people stuff in a minute. So technical, clinical, and security considerations. How are you thinking through those things early on in the process, or even mid process? Let's say we're 3 months in. How are we starting to bring our teams together, think about those things? What areas are the most important?
You know, you have to go back to the question of business drivers. And, you know, typically in a merger, there is an assumption that you're going to be able to reduce the cost, right? So
Yeah.
you start with the foundational pieces in terms of your data centers, your network. What opportunities do you have to consolidate on the infrastructure front, past just merging those together and doing some level of consolidation? Actually, can you drive any costs out? You know, one of the organizations may be in the process of a cloud migration. The other one may be, you know, not even thinking about that. There may be new data centers, you know, under construction, right? Physical data centers. So, I mean, you just really, in the due diligence, have to start looking at what's the current state, what's everybody planning to do, what do you need to stop, what do you need to start looking at that you might be doing together. You know, there's no rocket science to it. I don't want to minimize, but it's, you know, that's all part of the due diligence, figuring that out.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there are some things that you're going to need on the first day. It's really interesting to me. So on the first day, you don't even have an agreement. You haven't even come together, and people are already going to start asking you like, hey, how do we do shared calendaring? How do we do, yeah, it's serious. How do we do shared calendaring?
Yeah.
How do we do conferencing? Yeah. What's our conferencing solution? I mean, they start, and you're sitting there going, our security teams haven't even met each other yet.
Right.
And actually, this is where the cloud comes in. It's interesting because when you bring these two organizations together, you're like, well, we have this and we have this, but you haven't tied them together. Sometimes it's almost safer to go to a cloud solution, a third-party cloud solution, and just say, you know what, organizations do this all the time. They're still separate entities. We haven't done the due diligence on security. We don't want to just slap these networks together. There's just too many variables. So let's go ahead and fire up Zoom like we're using right now. This is not an ad for them. It's just one of many, or you know, or Microsoft solution or whatever. Let's go ahead and fire that up in the cloud, and we'll start using that for our video conferencing because it works. I mean, right now there's so many cloud solutions that give you that base level of interoperability and connectivity, and then you almost need to slow people down because they want to start talking. You know, are we going to go to a single identity system? Are we going to go to a single EHR? Are we going to go to, you know, how are we going to bring these things together? And just focus on the things you need to get done in order to get to that day, the merger day. Because really, there's a whole bunch of things you can't even do until the paperwork's done and signed.
Right.
And so there's part of me that says, you know, technical, security, and clinical. It's all people. It's all people and culture for those 6 to 9 months.